The numbers are in. People are doing plus 18s in dungeons, in Mythic Plus, but with what specs? Because clearly those would be the S tiers. And the opposite, worst performing specs would be the bottomest of the tier. And today we're going to be looking at the range DPS for Mythic Plus with a keen eye on performance and popularity throughout the big keys, and with some overall look at the meta at the end of the video on keys like +2s, +10s, and +12s and all of that, with some cool infographic moving around on the screen that you might enjoy, so stay tuned. And without further ado, let's start it off with Affliction. Straight off the bat, I have my data here because so much. Listen, we try to make these as informative as possible to upset as few people as possible, and that's never going to happen, so Affliction is S tier. No, it's not. Come on, if only. It is C tier. It's not too bad. Okay, so like I said at the beginning of the video, the top key pushers are plus 18s. So that would probably be around where S tier is. 17s-ish would probably be A tier, 16s-ish is B tier, and 15s-ish is C tier. Now, not all Affliction Warlocks are doing 15s, and as of recording this video, if I am not mistaken, the top Affliction Warlock is also clearing 16s, Arakara, and Mists, but that's only one dude. Or dudette. Do lady gamers play Affliction? I think they're just healing, right? Stereotype. But that out of the way, I cannot really rank the entire spec based off of one player. Sure, that player is doing crazy work on Affliction, and if, like, let's say the top 10 players would also kind of dabble a little bit into the 16s, it might be a B tier. But with that out of the way, it is C tier. 14s and 15s is where Affliction is at the moment. Those are the kind of keys that are clearing, so it's not that bad. Don't just, you know, cringe that it is C tier. It's still fine. Affliction is doing really good keys. And even for Affliction, you cannot get to these key levels without also learning good habits when performing your rotation, since good habits actually do lead to an increase in performance no matter what you do, even outside the video game. And that's where Fume, today's sponsor, comes in to offer you a healthier alternative to some habits you might have been struggling with. Stopping a bad habit suddenly is incredibly difficult for your brain, since it has been trained to constantly request hand-to-mouth fixation that we know so well, and Fume replaces that with a studied and documented healthier alternative based on plant compounds that go into the cores used for your device. Which is why my brother-in-law started to research and be interested in Fume, and he loves the stuff. Taking in deep menthol breaths gives him cool relief, and it helps that it comes with more flavors for him to try and never get bored of. Do you think that's air you're breathing now? Because I know for sure I am breathing flavored air. Nice, minty, cinnamon flavored air, since Fume comes with a lot of customizable options for this experience. And for fidgety individuals like my brother-in-law, it comes with the topper, which is perfect for it. It's rubbery, it's soft, and can get cleaned really easy, and that's important when I want to pretend to be a 1920s cartoon character. Yeah, see, yeah. By going to tryfume.com/Marcelian, scanning the QR code on the screen, or simply using our personal code Marcelian, you can get a free topper with your Fume purchase. Fume is an award-winning flavored air device that uses no batteries, no nicotines, and no vapors, and your boys here are stoked to be sponsored by a product that can improve the quality of your daily activities. Thanks, Fume. Yeah. And because we have to take these into kind of like an alphabetical order, Augmentation is next, spoiling the rest of the tier. It's no surprise. Will we ever have a meta without Augmentation in S tier? I don't really know, especially not in this post-Dragonflight, post-Evoker release, where the biggest barrier that people have is overcoming death and not overcoming lack of damage. We've talked about the issues with Mythic Plus. This is not the video, this is just a tier list. We're looking at Augmentation, but it is probably the major contributing factor to why Augmentation is in S tier, and it will continuously remain into S tier so long as the most dangerous stuff in a key that can fail it is not being able to survive, because that is what augmentation does, on top of the damage boost, of course, but it's keeping your tank and a bunch of the party members alive as well through massive incoming damage. It has way lower damage than a lot of other specs. Most likely, if you comprise a party of all of the other S and A tier specs, you would probably have more damage than with an augmentation, but since people struggle to survive, you probably won't be able to clear the highest of keys without this, at least not reliably and not efficiently anyway. So that's why it's S tier, and it will probably continue being S tier for the foreseeable future until Mythic Plus maybe gets a revamp. Fingers crossed, we'll see. Balanced Druid has been slightly surprising. I think we ranked it pretty highly before, but now it's kind of like, you know, the meta is settling in finally. Like, people are probably going to push up to like maybe 20s, 21s by the end of the season, and likely we won't see too much shift until then. Balance is comfortably sitting at 8 tier, a little bit on the lower side of the 8 tier, but that's fine. It is doing pretty high keys. We see, I think Door Key has probably the best timed key at the moment as of you watching this video, but is not the rank 1 boomy in the world just yet. He's on his way. I don't know if that's his goal or anything, but I do want to say that once again there are like a couple of exceptional balanced Druid players that are, you know, kind of heavy lifting the spec, but you know, at the end of the day, that's kind of what we have to look at to kind of figure out exactly where we place these specs in terms of performance, because we have to look at the best players that can take this to the most optimal and highest peak of performance possible, since the specs potential and applicability is what we kind of rank these tier lists on. Obviously, if it's Joe McSchmo in your +5 key playing balanced Druid, he might suck, right? So we're not talking about that. We're talking about the peak, the creme de la creme, the arcane of the mage. I am, of course, very biased towards this spec, but that doesn't change that it's mid. It's kind of mid. It has been mid ever since it's been nerfed. It's making mage players salty, and I'm not projecting this into this video whatsoever. It's not too bad. It's almost the best mage spec in the game. It's one of the better casters actually, but similar to last week, if you've watched last week's tier list, it's just kind of like a key level behind balanced Druid. It's not too bad, but it's just not pushing there yet. I don't know if it will ever push there at all, considering some of the top keys kind of run an enhancement shaman, so that covers the need of a bloodlust. You're probably definitely going to have a prop paladin and a discipline priest. So where does the mage fit in? Obviously the arcane intellect is pretty good, but since the meta is more than anything melee, it's not that great anymore. I don't know if Arcane has a higher potential to push more keys or higher keys, but right now it is sitting at around B tier, close to the top, but not really. Now, for Beast Mastery, also kind of surprising, it's C tier. Well, surprising in the sense that it was terrible for the better part of the season, and it's, you know, it's still C tier. It's not, you know, Arcane or balance level. I don't know if it should. I'm not a big fan of having this big of a difference between specs like Beast Mastery and, I want to say, Augmentation, but I think Augmentation should probably just not be in the tier list. It's just like a totally different thing. But let's say Balanced Druid, right? It's a big difference. And Hunter's kind of struggling, kind of. Survival is kind of doing a lot of heavy lifting, but in terms of the range version of the Hunter, it's on the better side. It doesn't bring anything particularly amazing, not anything that a party would essentially need. I don't think Hunters are particularly tankier than most other casters. They're okay, but I guess Shamans might be squishier, but who knows. But Beast Mastery is where it is right now, C tier. Moving to Demonology, very close to Beast Mastery as well. Again, a spec that's been kind of below average this entire season. It has its moments, it has its peaks. Sometimes it can be in raids, sometimes it can be in keys. It can do pretty good damage. Warlock is just not in a good spot overall in terms of like pretty much anything. They don't bring anything, like I say this, that they don't bring anything in a dungeon, but there are a lot of classes that do that. But it feels like now more than ever that's more important than anything, considering the affixes can be a wipe or clear type mechanic. The dispels can be a wipe or clear, and especially Demonology. Dude, if you play Siege of Borealis with the Devour affix, you're the worst spec to bring in a party. And I'm not saying that it's terrible. You barely have a kick. You have like no dispel. If you want to get the dispel in him just to help your healer out, it's going to tank your DPS, where, you know, Affliction and Destruction can actually do that. It's just, it doesn't feel like it's made for Mythic Plus. And it's not the worst on the list though, but you know, it's not far off. A little bit better, more better news is Destruction. Currently the top performer of the Warlock class. I don't know if it has anything to do with MDI. I actually don't remember if I ever saw Destruction Warlock in the MDI. But even so, it is decent. You have access to the imp for the dispel. Sometimes that really matters for magical dispels and things like that. It definitely helps the higher in keys you go. We felt this in our 11s and 12s. I cannot imagine what people feel in like their 15s. Jesus. That's obviously really good. It has a more or less reliable kick. It has good damage, which is probably its biggest selling point, because I guess gates can be good once again in Mists of Turn Aside, Siege of Brawlers for some of those skips that can really change a route and make the dungeon incredibly easy. But it doesn't feel like it's propelling the spec any more than that. And that's, you know, gates can be for any other Warlock spec, but I'm assuming the reason why Destruction is higher than Affliction, for instance, it's because of its damage. There's no real difference between the two in terms of utility. Fire Mage is kind of mid, I'm not gonna lie. Is that surprising to anybody? I don't think so. Fire Mage has been kind of like that for a very long time. It's not quite C tier. It's close to being below average. It's kind of below average depending on how you look at it. To be fair, the changes to Living Bomb has seen Fire come with a little bit of a resurgence, and pretty much everybody's playing the Bomba build, which is fun to say and decently fun to play. You know, it's not blowing anybody's mind, haha, pun intended. It's fine. It's a alternative to probably not be C tier. That's a very small consolation prize considering that both Arcane and Fire have been severely nerfed over the last couple of months, and being close to below average is just a shitty feeling. But outside of that, Mage is good, but the reason why Fire isn't any higher is because of Frost Mage, and it's probably not going to be any higher than that as much as I would like it because it's my main. Frost Mage is the premier mage spec. I think it might even have the highest single target period, which is not really relevant for Mythic Plus, but it might be relevant for boss damage. It's probably a competition that it still has with Arcane. However, it is blowing Arcane out of the water when it comes to AoE, hence why it is so high. It is probably the tankiest mage spec, and that can matter when you push higher and higher keys. It's kind of neck and neck with Balanced Druid in A tier. I feel like there's just a few more Frost Mages that are doing harder content than Balanced Druid. There's not a big difference, but if we have to find a difference, that would probably be it. Maybe the top 10 Frost Mages have a better overall score than the top 10 Balanced Druids in terms of IO. Maybe they've done an extra 16 as opposed to the Balanced Druids, but they are slightly ahead. Not too much, but, you know, A tier is still pretty rock solid. Marksmanship has been a little bit of, I guess, is it a letdown? I feel like this is deja vu. I feel like whenever we look at a tier list for Mythic Plus when it comes to range, Marksmanship is always pretty low, pretty unimpressive. BM kind of has some swings, but Marksmanship kind of feels like at most B tier. To be fair, I kind of want to see it into S tier, man. I want to know what a Marksmanship defined meta looks like. I think Hunters need a bone. Get your pet out. But, you know, obviously, you're kind of the loser of the Hunter spec. You don't have Bloodlust unless you gimp yourself, and that kind of sucks. And if you take a Hunter, you kind of expect it to do Bloodlust. Now, what else are you going to do? You have Soothe with Trank Shot, sure. You have some nice traps. They can do some pretty cool things, but the damage is probably just not there, because we probably would have seen it higher than Beast Smash at the very least. And to be fair, with how some of the specs are strong this tier, pretty much all the S and A tier have at least one Bloodlust, so I don't think you would need a Bloodlust if you want to take a Marksmanship into your group anyway, but I don't feel like it brings anything unique. It's clearly below average, it's close to being the bottom of the barrel, and it's just kind of sad at this point. After so many years, still nothing impressive. Devastation, it had a better start at the beginning of the season. It's not so good now, and now I don't know, because I feel like Devastation has quite a bit of damage, but I think they will kind of always be at opposite sides of the spectrum when it comes to Augmentation. There's no competition. I feel like Augmentation is legit a problem. I would have hoped that introducing Augmentation into the meta would have spurred Blizzard to design them better and balance them better and not make it super mandatory, but most likely because it's so mandatory, it's really outshining Devastation by quite a lot, and you don't really see Devastations almost at all, which is sad. As much as I'm not a big fan of the skinny lizards, it's fun to see, it's explosive, it's cool to play, and, you know, I kind of want some variety in my pug keys, okay? It's not gonna be with Devastation, though. Elemental, After the nerfs, people have been a little bit worried about it. It's okay, it's top of the B tier, it's close to being A tier, it's just not pushing the keys as high as Frost Mage and Balance Druid at the moment, but it's by no means a bad spec. And considering that Resto Shaman kind of dipped a little bit, if you don't have an enhancement, maybe you can go to, you know, Elemental to get your Shaman-y things, your now 2-minute Poison Cleansing Totem, which was ridiculous last season because Flashlighting was just ridiculous across the board. But Elemental is arguably more fun to play now, but that's neither here nor there. It's okay, like it's doing way better than the Mage specs and definitely way better than the Warlock specs, so you are on the top echelon of casters, Elemental Shamans, because we only have one caster left and Shadow Priest, and it's not gonna, you know, once again, blow anybody's mind. It's B tier. It's okay. I guess if we look at this meta, B tier specs are fine-ish, I guess, up until Destruction. Shadow Priest is just Shadow Priest. Like, it's big competition with Discipline when it comes to bringing the Priest toolkit is going to keep it a little bit lower on the overall rankings. Shadow Priest is by no means bad. I've seen Shadow Priests pump damage, but, you know, obviously I don't do the 16s, 15s, where Shadow kind of is at the moment. Close, 16s-ish, some 16s. So I don't know how it performs there, but it's clearing them, so it goes into B tier. Now, we look at this tier list, and people definitely have questions, definitely have problems. Like, this is just for fun, okay? We're looking at the top best 0.1% of players to kind of judge these by, because if we don't, then you will have a tier list something like this, which is what you would rank the specs if you would look at +2 level keys. Essentially, when everybody just jumps into the Mythic Plus scene for the first time. If you are somebody who's not playing at, you know, the peak level, then you are just trying to get into, you don't need to worry, you can just pick whatever you want, and you can keep scaling the content. Let's say if we do like a +10 ranking, you can see it like this. You have A, B, and maybe C tier, with probably what you would expect from some of the lower performing specs being into the C tier, but still pretty high with a lot of essentially S tier level specs, because there's so much you can actually do in a +10 as a, you know, someone who clears +18s, right? Mobs don't have that much HP, okay? So there's not much more damage you can do. So you're fine, even when you look at 10s. Where you might want to see some shifts is probably in +12s. This is how the specs would look in a +12, because +12s is where the first big difficulty wall really hits, when you get rid of the weekly affix, and now you have the guile thing, whatever, where everybody just has more damage, more HP. It is significantly more difficult, and you can see that the specs start to spread out a little bit more when it comes to their performance, but you still see quite a lot of S tier specs as opposed to the only one that we have if we look at the overarching meta as well. And if you want to see kind of like how the specs performance / popularity evolve over the course of pushing keys, you can watch this graph that it's so fun to make every weekend, takes so many hours, but this is how the specs kind of perform, going from the lowest to the highest key, how many people play them, how many keys are done successfully with these keys, with these specs in mind. And you can see it kind of shifts back and forth, and some of the S tier specs that you see at the bottom of the key list are not the same ones that end up in the end. So overall, to try to do a tier list that encompasses every single possible aspect to make everybody happy is impossible, okay? But hopefully this gives you a better idea of what the specs kind of are. It's fun to see how the meta evolves, but in the end of the day, 99% of us can just play whatever we want and still be able to do decent keys. And if you've missed the melee version of this, check the link right here, because we did do it last week in a similar fashion, and the meta hasn't really changed for melee since then, so you can still check it out and see if you are a melee fanboy or fangirl, where does your spec land?